By the time of making of this, we have either 16 or 20 entries on the list, depending whether or not we want to classify duplicates of weapons, like main hand and offhand axe, as 1 or 2 separate entries. Moreover, putting those entries on typical F to S scale wouldn't lend itself for entertaining viewer experience, as over half of them belongs in C or B tier, and therefore we rank those numerically from worst to best, so that there's at least something controversial over here I could receive warm words of appreciation for. Furthermore, we're measuring micro-inch power differences in what's already a dang Beatles breakfast, and our lovely overlords at ANET wield the power of making entire ranking completely obsolete with every patch. So whatever my Damas says will probably be irrelevant in about 3 months. Also, GW2 has 3 goddamn game modes with different rule sets and different balancing, meaning it's impossible to objectively rank things based on their viability, because a weapon that's great in PvE might be trash in PvP or World v World and vice versa, Axis for example. So take it only as seriously as you need to do to have fun, whether that's by watching, listening or turning the comment section into a World version of Elden Ring's Lake of Rot. Nevertheless, without further delay, let's get to the harpoon gun. Number 20. Harpoon gun. I'm pretty sure more people are surprised that we even have access to harpoon gun at all than that it is on the last place of this ranking. The bloody thing is an underwater exclusive weapon which, as you may know, makes it literally useless on 80% of the playable surface of Tyria, which is not going to change anytime soon, as this wall doesn't face any potential flooding due to carbon pollution melting glaciers. Though, as to quote the Iron Legion, we're working on it. Nevertheless, is a take as hot as Jormag's frozen behind that GW2 players generally despise underwater combat, but being exclusive to only environment moistier than critical isn't the only one of Harpoon's gun's grave sins. The thing is a Frankensteinian hybrid of longbow and rifle, combining together the parts of each weapon least likely to work together, with 2 skills that send you away from the target, packed next to a fan of harpoons asking you to swim in sniffing distance from your target to do any significant damage. And also its best skill is a carbon copy of disappointment that Rifle F1 is, just in case rest of the package wasn't shitty enough. Number 19. Main hand mace. Oh boy, here we start the controversy, or not. I honestly don't know if it's a hot take. I'm too busy staring up at the rock I live under to go and ask people for their opinions of iron ball on a stick. However, I'm pretty certain my reasoning behind its placement holds its ground sufficiently well not to get me excommunicated from the asylum I built around me. In its base form, Mace mainhand has a stun, a daze, a minuscule amount of barrier application, and a block that's inferior to Aegis in every measure possible, as with or without Shield Master trait, the block in question functions exactly like Aegis, but takes away your agency for the duration, with a flimsy promise of damage if you manage to hit something with as fast as bowel movements short-ranged counterswing. A backwards synergy with CC also rears its ugly head, as Mace's dedicated trait requires targets to be CC'd to grant its damage steroids, while its second skill's damaging counterswing cannot be activated against target that for obvious reasons cannot attack you. What do you expect me to proc it off of? My own skill issue? On top of which, skill 3 would override longer, better CCs with its short days, meaning all that can realistically make use of its trait's damage increase is the auto chain. Complete lack of mobility, combined with complete lack of ranged options, with counter synergy with its own trait, and within its skills themselves, over-reliance on bunkering and CC to form any value, and susceptibility to be cuck-held by either Aegis or blindness eating the best hit, are already quite a library of downsides, nowhere near counteracted enough by one decent stun and existence of traits like aggressive onslaught. All the while, a Kim Skullgrinder combo exists and makes the whole game worse for it. Mace Mayhand is not the weakest in general sense, nor the worst, nor the most unloved weapon in the game, but is the only one, removal of which would be a positive change to the game as a whole. That's why I put it one spot above the weapon removal of which no one could have noticed, and just one spot below, number 18, Spear. The underwater one. It cannot be understated how much being completely useless in 80% of the content drags one down. Believe me, I know from experience. A fish, no matter how hardcore, is rather unlikely to win a tree climbing competition, and so is underwater-only weapon unlikely to suit the need of one oxygen-breathing land creature to stab another. I'm not going to the pool party to have judicial duel, and you probably neither, so let's just accept that the wet weapon is whack and leave it with congratulational "you tried" that it deserves. Number 17. Torch. Time to hurt feelings. My feelings! Because I love Torch, and the idea behind it. And it pains me greatly to know that this simple yet brilliant concept of setting yourself on fire is so artificially handicapped, even within the niche it was shoehorned into. But first things first, Torch is pretty much dead on the spot due to courtesy of being a Condi weapon. We can try to argue about it all day long, but Warrior has literally one dedicated Condi build, and said build remains vastly unpopular due to how much of an afterthought it feels like. And being glued to the side of the aforementioned afterthought is a bit of a problem for Torch. Power damages for both Torch skills are sadder than my hopes for the future, and the 5th skill only does power damage at the very last tick of the skill itself, which combine to make burning application its only strength besides that little bit of utility in terms of cleanse and mobile fire field with blast finisher to pair. With cleanse being relatively easy to access from Warrior's traits, and fire field interactions being rather niche utility, combined with the fact that arena nerds sent old Torch CDR trait to the Shadow Realm with no compensation for it just to give Warrior quickness upkeep, and it's not hard to come to the conclusion that source of fuel for Torch's bright beautiful flames is its own burning wasted potential. With cooldowns begging for former Hit the Soul CDR to be baked into the skills themselves, complete reliance on condition damage and niche or redundant utility, Torch's only purpose is failing to fill the void in my heart. If only we could have some weapons on a class that's predominantly power damage focused that don't utterly suck as a supplement to power damage builds. Oh, how nice would that be. Number 16. Offhand Dagger. Behold my own words coming back to bite me in the ass mere seconds from leaving my mouth with an example of a power weapon that sucks the aforementioned. Dagger Offhand is oddly poor in comparison to other power weapons, despite having from the technicality perspective a ground to stand on, as Westeros Ruin deals formidable damage and boon strips quite a lot, if you manage to sneak it in between your opponent's attempts to roll his face across his keyboard, of course, or if you follow it up after any CC. Unfortunately, the other skill more than makes up for Wastrel's noticeable upside. Blade Storm only blocking projectiles, only from front and only for the flimsy second and a half, is very disappointing in terms of defensive utility for a skill on 25 seconds cooldown, and not to mention, to receive barrier from it, you have to shove it in the face of an enemy with reaction time of an average lamppost. Having roughly twice the cooldown it needs to be borderline useful in niche it tries to fill, Blade Storm's only unique purpose could be serving as a part of a suction pump. Number 15. Warhorn. Warhorn doesn't deserve this place. It didn't do anything wrong. It just happened to suffer from the same affliction of being glued to the side of an afterthought that took out Torch. In its case, however, it's glued to a little less unloved afterthought, and provides group utility, with AoE cleanse, AoE boons and AoE barrier, which are all more excusable in average build than just self-cleanse and some condis that you'd have to build around to get value from it to begin with. All in all, Warhorn is not bad. It's just a part of something that is not fully developed yet and which is rather unlikely to survive until the end of its development. The fact that we have supportive offhand and supportive two-hander, but no supportive main hand, is rather telling. And the fact that equipping a weapon with no way of hitting an opponent on a class that needs to hit the opponent to feel its "you get to play the game" bar should practically finish the sentence for me. Warrior needs his angry juice, or some hardcore defense option, or noticeable damage payoff, or hard lockdown to even roll out of the bed in the morning, let alone function. And Warhorn unfortunately doesn't have either of those things, effectively cuckolding its own performance. Number 14. Spear. The land one. You may be shocked seeing Spear so low on the list, considering it was hot shit for the last 2 months. But now, after getting adjusted by the developers, it has more use as a bad example than an actual weapon. It has no defensive utility besides one evade that doesn't even cover entire forced animation of the skill it's attached to. It has 0 boon application, less mobility than pistol offhand, less hard lockdown than shield, and skill shots for all its reasonable damage, which aren't even rewarding your skill with genuinely considerable damage numbers anymore. Spear is currently a 200 version of Axis, which roughly translates to it is going to get you killed due to lack of utility, while simultaneously not having the versatility of 100 weapons being able to be mixed with other weapons for the sake of utility, which saves Axis from disappointing their parents harder than I do, which cannot be said about Spear after its utility was stripped away. Poor thing deserved better. Unfortunately, life is brutal, and Great Hydrated One is a cruel god. Number 13. Pistol. Oh boy, here we go. It is genuinely difficult to explain how hard Pistol sucks and why exactly does it do so, and all is the fault of Dragon's Roar and its horse shit. Upon use, Dragon's Roar spawns an AoE in front of you, dealing damage depending on the number of bullets spent, and pushes you backwards. AoE itself is supposed to be player state independent. However, the self-pushback of the skill extends its aftercast by a small but not insignificant margin, making the fact of player state independence of this skill less useful to the user than a frozen banana is to a handless blacksmith. On top of which, whichever way you move, your Dragon's Roar kills any forward momentum you have, meaning it pretty much cannot be used in a fun way as it always holds your aggression, while having just not enough pushback to consistently push you out of any trouble you could have walked in. Small stationary AoE that holds your mobility. Where I have seen this before? Yes. Dragon's Roar is basically dyed 100 blades, and the fact that entire weapon is practically tailored around it doesn't help it either. Recharge of individual bullet is purposefully kept slow as they can be reloaded with Gunstinger, but for the purposes of both combo potential and cooldown management, this solution doesn't really make sense. What we end up with is 2 skills with inflated recharge timers that when combined barely outperform a throwaway skill on 8 seconds of cooldown, while sharing most of its stupid problems and having extremely scuffed cooldown management that leaves you with shitey auto attack on 5 seconds of cooldown if you don't pay attention to it. I'm not dedicating my entire offhand to that, and anyone who didn't accidentally put their brain on backwards probably wouldn't either. Number 12. Rifle. Oh, Rifle. The true and tested junk galore in all its incomprehensible backwards glory. Rifle is a curious case, as nothing on it seems to work as intended. In PvE scenarios, a way to achieve highest DPS is just spamming skills 2 and 3 and resetting them with skill 5 off cooldown, while completely ignoring the fact that skill 4 and burst even exist. Yes, your skill 4 is always a DPS loss, and so is your burst. It barely comes on top of auto attacks if it's 3rd level, so we can throw it in if you have nothing else to press to upkeep traits or something. The point is, even before we consider the fact that you'd achieve roughly double the DPS with any other weapon, the rifle's internal functionality just shits the bed anyway without outside intervention, not only forcing the weapon into melee, but also making it jarring and unfun to play with. Second to that, in both versus modes, Rifle is delegated towards essentially a cheese strategy. double tapping suckers into the Grand Dimension is counteracted by the fact that you get double tapped by anything with a pulse yourself. And using this smoothbore celebration of spaghetti code and scuffed hit detection just stops going well as soon as you get spotted by anything with more IQ than chromosomes. Rifle is not good and nowhere near it, but it's at least not useless and not the worst ranged power weapon Warrior has. Not anymore, at least. Number 11. Axe Mainhand. With the inclusion of Axe on this list, we officially leave the realm of weapons that are confidently garbage and enter the realm of those that are confidently mediocre. Axe has damage. That could be the end of this segment, but let's expand it a little. Axe Mainhand is a perfectly serviceable damaging platform, with decent skills 2 and 3, and that's the end of its upsides. Its only mobility lies in the core burst, which is on the scuffed side of the junk wheel, and the range doesn't help it either because it practically doesn't have any. Axe's saving grace is that little bit of ranged pressure skill 3 provides, and the fact that for a damaging skill, Cyclone Axe does its job criminally well. And yes, Decapitate is also funny. That's unfortunately the extent of it. Axe suffers from bad mobility, meaning it depends on utility skills and your offhand to deliver it in sniffing distance from the target. And for main hand weapon, on a class designed around the main hands being the thing that takes it places, that's a really noticeable downside. Number 10. Longbow. Longbow carries around the reputation of being a country weapon, and that gets it neglected in the eyes of most war remains out there. That is a false reputation. The thing that should get it neglected is the tremendously stupid cast times on its AoEs and projectile velocity being set to the same speed at which my mental instability develops. Which is surprisingly fucking slow given the circumstances, if I'm to be honest. Longbow haven't left the Condi jail for quite some time, specifically because it is its primo power damage skill that suffers the most from slow as cast and the projectile speeds at the same time. Who cares that the weapon has competent power and condition damage, that it can burst for upwards of half of someone's health bar with 2 of its shortest cooldowns, that it has competent sustained damage, good AoE area denial, and decent blind and in-mob access. Who cares about any of that when both of its AoEs take 3 to 5 business days to come out, lose to projectile denial, and can be reflected whilst the arrow is still in the air. All it took was a little junk, and what could be a great weapon ended up in between 2 one-handers completely dependent on other weapons to push their wheelchairs around. Speaking of which, number 9. Offhand Axe. Offhand finds itself above the main hand in this ranking mostly because it is applicable in more scenarios. Basically due to just being an offhand. It provides better than decent damage and the ability to turn a teamfight into a smoothie, but just like main hand axe, it needs other weapon to set up for it. To its advantage over the main hand axe, however, works the fact that all main hand weapons either have mobility necessary to drag this thing around, or provide CC to keep target in place if you by some miracle manage to get to it. While the same thing cannot really be said about all but one from the list of available offhands. You're generally good to go with Axe Offhand so long you don't pair it with the Axe Mainhand. But if you really insist on doing so, you'll be just like a stereotypical Viking. Hella cool and dead since early Middle Ages. Number 8. Shield. Shield is the foreshadowed mystical setup capable offhand we were talking about moments ago. It's the only offhand that brings CC, some mobility and defensive skill all in one package. The stun might be only 2 seconds, dash might be on the shorter side, and shield block has rather lengthy cooldown, but nowhere else do we get all 3 of these for the price of one single offhand slot. Even offhands higher on this list don't bring all 3 of these, though they shine in different ways Shield cannot. As an option purely defensive by its design, Shield is artificially shoehorned into the role of playing second fiddle. And just like you need more than one violin to form the violence, so you need another weapon to do the job, as all Shield can do is set up for the aforementioned another weapon. It is kind of unfortunate for Shield that it was designed to help push other weapons to the pedestal, and because it does so well, it also gets overshadowed more. Shield is a weapon equivalent of quality assurance in a company managed by morons. Number 7. Mace Offhand. Ever since Tremor resets the cooldown of Crushing Blow, this thing has enough damage to do its job without the Hammer trait. And with its inclusion, it competes in raw fuck-off damage with heavy hitters like Arc Divider and Fierce Blow, which isn't a phrase I expected to have luxury of saying without the use of advanced diplomatic technique called lying, but here we go. Mace Offhand shows a completely different mark of quality than Mace Mainhand. It is self-sufficient, its skills synergize with itself, it can be slotted alongside pretty much any mainhand and still perform respectably well, it doesn't depend on specific trait for entirety of its value, doesn't suck ass, and doesn't serve as a backbone for the most toxic build the class has in store. The thing would genuinely be better than Hammer itself due to flexibility and additional might and vulnerability application if only Tremor wasn't this much of a pretentious little bitch. Tremor is one of those skills that work correctly only in controlled environment on a flat surface against something that doesn't move. In every other situation, you roll a dice at disadvantage like it's a bloody D&D. But with first D standing for disaster this skill is, and another for the dumbass who coded it this way. Treat Tremor like it's a melee skill, and avoid targets with magnetic aura like a bloody plague. Otherwise you'll be quickly introduced to all the reasons why Mace Offhand is still below the Hammer. Speaking of which, number 6, the Hammer. Not really much can be said here. A lockdown-focused weapon with some AoE and built-in damage payoff for tickling someone who's making it out with the ground the way he deserves. Hammer is designed to be a little slow melee weapon which lacks defenses other than hard CC, and that's for a good reason. The reason being that CC is coming from off-screen out of invisibility or just too fast to react, are simply unfun to deal with. And there was a time when ArenaNet gave the slightest shit about keeping the asinine horsecock out of the game. Unfortunately, a melee weapon that's countered by stability, ages, blindness and stun breaks, all the while being slow enough to make its CC dodgeable on reaction and having issues with targets that kite proactively, as Hammer's only gap closer requires adrenaline, just didn't make it to the top 5. Believe me, I love the as much as the next guy, but even I have to keep some illusion of objectivism over here. Number 5, Sword Offhand. Ladies and gentlemen, we officially enter the Heavyweight Champions League, the best of warrior weapons, the fucking B tier. In truth, the weapons from now onward are either good, or their downsides aren't overweighting the upsides, meaning equipping neither of those could be in any way considered a handicap. Sword Offhand lands in this category due to its versatility. Impale is a decent poke tool you have for when you can't close the distance on somebody, and Rip rewards you with high burst damage just in case you manage to get in the aforementioned melee, with some Torment, Cripple and Might application to top it off. Meanwhile, Riposte is making Shield look kind of stupid as it does Shield's job suspiciously well. In every situation where you manage to kite a little bit, Riposte gives you all the survivability you need while having half the cooldown of Shield block. Every build, be it power or condition focused, finds something valuable in Offhand Sword, and it complements both more reserved and safe playstyles with its ranged poke and defensive skill, while rewarding risky plays with additional damage only available in melee. This is how a competent warrior weapon should look like. Number 4, Staff. Staff was hit recently with the round of nerfs and had its core burst deprived of almost half of its range, which certainly influenced its overall power but wouldn't really shift its position in the ranking. We talked to death about Staff's issues long ago, It's a support weapon on a class that doesn't have fully fleshed out support build yet, and more than that, it has its own quirks that drag it down as well. Linebreaker has ridiculously long animation and the same pathing problems as Rush, but exaggerated by the fact that unlike Rush, it's a ground targeted skill, making it even more prone to bugging out on terrain and unable to course correct mid-movement. Being a support weapon forces low damage and high survivability, making it instantly desirable by bunker builds, courtesy of which it already suffered aforementioned round of nerfs. Furthermore, its primal burst is for some reason extremely underwhelming numbers-wise. It's achieving the same damage Steph's autos do on average, but has an adrenaline cost. No idea how that's supposed to entice me to play this weapon on anything other than fully dedicated healer, which isn't fully fleshed out yet. Still, Staff is a very solid design, which could find broader use. It just needs a little bit more time on the back burner. Number 3. Sword main hand. First 3 positions are so close to one another that all 3 could almost be used interchangeably, but that doesn't make for a good video, so we'll commit to even some deeper judging. Sword main hand is very good, if not great, but it also isn't without a flaw. Once you cast Flurry or Flaming Flurry, you can't interrupt that skill in normal way because something is shagged in the code. My headcanon is that Flurry isn't actually an attack, but your character just has a seizure from seeing one too many particle effects in the last 12 years of this game's existence. Nonetheless, if you like swords, you better learn how to stall cancel, or you'll get occasionally griefed by your own weapon's inability to stop cosplaying a rabid air circulation device. Besides that, Aftercast could use a little polish, and Immobilize from Flurry could be taken off of literally first frame of animation well before you hit anything and spread across many hits this ability performs, so that its application makes the coherent sense instead of loosely implying that your character can hold people in place with their sheer force of will. But all of that are minor issues that in total aren't diminishing the weapon's effectiveness in either power or combi builds, to both of which the weapon caters by having brilliant power ratios as well as not insignificant condition application with great mobility to supplement both. The sword is, quite literally, inches away from perfection. Number 2. Greatsword. Greatsword, by all intents and purposes, is just a big sword. A very diminishing statement considering what Greatsword should have been, but in Warrior's case over here, it's pretty close to truth. Greatsword has exceptional mobility, like swords, a ranged poke tool, like swords, great power damage, like swords, one situationally awesome defensive skill, like swords, supplementary boon generation, like swords, and high damage burst skill, also like swords. What Greatsword doesn't have is condition damage, but it replaces that with much greater AoE potential, leading itself to be a more competent group fight weapon. Greatsword's design stood the test of time and remains popular even now, 12 years after its initial conception. And now that Rush is fixed, Greatsword has just one design flaw holding it back from claiming number 1 in this ranking. 100 fucking blades. Do I need to say more? The bloody thing is pain to use even in PvE, as even against immobile bosses with hitboxes the size of Nebraska, you'll still have to dodge or sidestep damaging abilities of the boss, and generally move to do mechanics, meaning this skill isn't a potential liability only in fights that are poorly designed to begin with. This skill is just pain, and ArenaNet's reluctance to do something about it is quite frankly stupid, and therefore the Greatsword firmly loses its first spot to number 1, main hand dagger. What can I even say? Unblockable, damaging boon removing gap closer as the best skill, another gap closer with slow application, a second skill, and nigh instant melee daze that lasts for longer if you interrupt somebody with it as a third skill. Main hand dagger is a Swiss Army knife with range of utility just wide enough to cooperate nicely with any offhand other than torch, and to find its niche in most if not all warrior power builds. Even in PvE it finds patches, since Spellbreaker became usable DPS in group content, and in relation to rest of the warrior weapons, it just doesn't really have a singular major flaw. Unless you consider Slicing Maelstrom to be one, which I wouldn't blame you for, as that thing doesn't really work as smoothly with rest of weapons kit as Callbest does, and sacrifices most of its upsides for entirely wrong set of benefits, but even that is miles ahead of problems other weapons have. That would be all as far as ranking goes. If you consider the shit quality you had pleasure enjoying for past 30 minutes worthy appetizer to whatever succulent Chinese meal you've been joyfully gorging on or whatever else you've been doing in the meantime, you're welcome. Have a good one. And of course, a special sign of gratitude towards the generous Patreon supporters who continuously help me improve my surprisingly efficient forms of wasting everyone's precious time on this world. You're all truly welcome. Crabface out.